Hi, Charley Miller. We're live, Unitonomy today, Monday, April 6th. We're going to be talking safety today. We have our first guest on the show, Michael Fackler here. Hi, Michael. Welcome. Michael's with Caliber Safety. Also, we've got people you probably recognize from before, Martin Lowe of OnPlane Consulting. And we got Brad Shuck, Dr. Brad Shuck from the University of Louisville. Um, we were just chatting here before we started and kind of realizing the common denominator here of everyone on the show, besides just being some boring white dudes, which we will improve here in time, we also are all passionate about people and how people can reach their potential as performers in companies, and how do people collaborate. So here is my crowd. I forgot to push it live. Hey, everybody. You have to remember, I have to be the director and the host here, and I'm not too good at two things at once sometimes, especially early on Monday morning. So anyways, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. Michael Fackler, Caliber Safety. Michael, do you hear me okay?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, great. So let's start, Michael, by just telling us a hair about what you do and what Caliber Safety provides.
Well, we're a safety consulting business. The big challenge that we have with our business is that it's way more than just talking about safety compliance. What we really we help bring alignment in business leaders. There you go. There was some reverb there. It was kind of throwing me off there. So what we do is we work with business owners to really understand what's going on inside their business, both from a safety and health standpoint, but also from a people standpoint. When we talk about managing people, it really comes down to one word: interdependence. And our organizations are a collection of complex and interdependent systems. And so what we do is we help organizations understand that you really just can't focus on safety, because how you do safety is really how you just do work. And so we focus on leadership, employee engagement, systems and processes, performance improvement, continuous monitoring. So really, but at the end of the day, what we really do is we help businesses build leaders who lead organizations effectively. It's bringing in alignment with safety into the rest of the organization, and really helping drive value through the safety domain.
All right, so super interesting. Interconnectedness, interdependence. Safety obviously provides a huge role to everything. And when I hear that word, I don't just think of, oh, there's a machine there that could cut my finger off. I'm also thinking of emotional safety. I work more with knowledge workers at Unitonomy. And in that area, when we think about safety, we're always talking about any collaboration starts with a sense of safety that my professional identity is accepted here. I can say what I think. I can put ideas forward. Those ideas will be respected, and I will be treated well by others. There's a sense that anyone can raise their hand and not be hurt in any sort of response. So I'm going to, first of all, throw this over to Brad real quickly. Brad, in your world, when you research all things employee engagement, what do you know about safety in this sort of context?
Well, I think to Michael's point, I think this is all very interconnected. One of the pillars of engagement is safety. And we talk about safety in a variety of different forms, from physical safety, social safety, Charley, to being able to raise my hand in a meeting and feel like I'm a part of the team, that my voice is going to be heard. All of those things, they matter. And they build in these micro experiences that build up towards the employee experience. And when we think about safety, there's no question about it that it is one of the absolute pillars of employee engagement today.
And go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, see, and we believe that, and what we see sometimes is, though, safety is almost like is an afterthought. It's seen as a separate part of the business, that we manage safety differently. When I was in operations, we did a safety climate survey, and one of the questions that we asked was, who's responsible for safety? Well, I mean, I was new to this role, so I was trying to kind of get the lay of the land. And the overwhelming response of the people, the vast majority of the people said the safety manager was responsible for safety. And that's exactly the kind of culture, that we want to fight against. Where what we want to build a culture where everyone feels accountable and responsible for doing the right things to deliver, the right types of results. But that's often the challenge that we see in organizations. And what we say is that organizations are nothing but a collection of systems and processes. And like all systems, whether it's like an engine in a car, or whether it's a biological system like a tree, or it's an organization, the whole of the system is not improved if you just focus on one aspect and improve it, right? Because there's things that you can do in safety that impact productivity and quality. And there's things that you can do to improve productivity and quality that have an direct impact on safety. And so it's like you have to look at it more holistically, and what are the things that our employees are doing on a daily basis? How do we define and nurture their approach to work in a way that provides optimal outcomes more consistently over time? And part of that is what Brad's saying, is how do you get people engaged? How do you get them, see in themselves the value that they can bring, through, solving problems, addressing issues, so on and so forth.
I have a question for you, Michael, and for Martin here. You're both consultants that go into companies and you advise them on all of these things. And sort of something I want to think about here is sort of a past, present, future in the context of the pandemic. In the past, before this COVID-19 thing happened, when you would go into a company, how much convincing does it take to say, look, the earlier you all get ahead of cultivating your culture, thinking about safety, making this holistic approach so that everyone feels that they own this and can be a part of improving this culture, how much of it do you really have to, extend that philosophy so they buy into that? Or do you think companies lately are starting to wise up and realizing the earlier we get ahead of this, the easier this is going to be to scale over time?
Yeah. Speaking for myself, I mean, that's often the challenge, right? And that's the challenge in safety, right? Because if you look at, for the most part, since the 1970s, since OSHA was enacted, safety has been largely defined by the absence of accidents, right? So if my company has a zero accident rate, then the belief is that we're good, and then the opposite of that, if my company has a high accident rate, then we have a poor safety. And so usually, no news is good news to a lot of business owners' minds. And that's exactly the reason why we started this business, is because safety professionals aren't having these conversations. They aren't having conversations about safety is so much more than an end result. Safety is a process. If you look at it's not, and that's the challenge. Is how do you get employers to say, okay, because I can run across a 4-lane highway in the afternoon, blindfolded, and I can get to the other side, and I can be fine, not hair messed up on my head. Well, if I had hair, right? But that's not an optimal way to go about crossing the street. But unless there's some type of pain, unless there's some type of, just like we're experiencing now, it's hard for people sometimes to focus and adjust their attention towards employee safety and health.
Martin, would you concur when you go into companies that kind of, how much of this is sort of delivering a philosophy and getting them to buy in early?
Well, the philosophy and having this built has allowed some businesses to pivot very quickly, or the lack thereof has exposed the weaknesses in the foundation very, very quickly. And I think for people who are sitting, at the leadership positions inside a business, I'm guessing that before we went into this, they said, oh, maybe I could do a little bit of work there, but not today. I'll do that like next week, right? And then we get into this, and all of a sudden, you have to react now. And the speed at which your organization can move is completely driven by the culture in which you've built up inside that organization. And so some organizations have effectively pivoted and done a lot in the last 2 or 3 weeks to address that. Some organizations are, effectively out of business now. And I think that when you start to look into the future, people are going to become really interested in not just to Michael's point, how do I keep myself from getting hurt today, but am I operating this business in the most effective way to get in front of the things that may be out there in the future. And for me, when I think about safety, safety is all about a culture of safety. Safety is not driven by a process in and of itself. It's driven by the people that are operating the process and whether or not they care to be safe that day and that they're bought into it and that they're all together trying to do it. From working in manufacturing companies with multi-site operations, you would have some sites where they had built that culture of safety, and their safety metrics were substantially better than the sites that hadn't built that culture. And the only difference in terms of the process that they had was how much people were bought into what they were doing. It's that safety culture. And so I'm hoping that coming out of this, people will realize, hey, I have these processes, I have these machines, I have all this stuff built, but it doesn't go anywhere without my people. I mean, at the end of the day,
Right.
the biggest thing that's changed for these businesses is all of a sudden their people either can't come to work, are afraid to come to work, they're not sure what they really need to do, or they need to reallocate resources very, very quickly, and they're just not calibrated to do it. And a lot of that's driven by culture, whether that's safety culture and keeping people safe today, or culture inside the business generally that allows them to pivot and move fast. So I don't know if I answered. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, and to add on to what Martin was saying, and ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to shift people's thoughts that, hey, we have a safety culture, and then we have our broader organizational culture, where really what we're trying to say is, no, you just have your culture. You just have a way about going about your work. You have a way about how you address problems that are your safety culture is just a small subset of your broader organizational culture. So it's about a shared philosophy about how we get things done. It's about how we shared philosophy and values around communication and engagement. And so when you start talking about that, you start having a much bigger conversation. And this is where I really think that safety professionals can really add a lot of value to the organizations, because safety is oftentimes front and center of how work gets done. The safety manager interfaces with all levels of the organization. And so this is where I really think we can help leaders understand what they can do now in the midst of all this chaos, but also what they can do in the aftermath, so they can build engagement, build communication, build levels of trust, and build that culture where people, really propel the organization for success.
That's a nice segue to talk about the present. And I believe that culture is something we all own inside of organizations. Not to your point, Michael, the safety manager being the only person worried about safety. No, everyone's got to buy into this. Everyone's got to feel like they have some ownership in cultivating this thing. In every aspect of the culture, I think that's true. So in the present, boy, are we seeing the companies that were ready for this versus not ready for this, to Martin's point, right? If you've been kind of thinking about this, you can shift very quickly if you need to shift when crisis hits, because your culture is nimble now. And if it's not, you're going to have these problems. Great example. How many companies are you seeing where they're getting complaints from employees because people don't feel safe right now? Based on the virus is spreading, they're literally having to raise their hands, sometimes externally, saying, hey, in this environment, I don't feel safe to go into work and my employer's not doing enough. That tells me here's a culture where the employees weren't owning it. They didn't feel safe to speak up about their own safety, right? It's something that's coming top down in terms of safety processes and so forth. And that means you have an inflexible culture that couldn't pivot overnight when the pandemic started to happen. Michael, how many groups do you see suffering like this right now?
Well, I see it in my own, community and my own network of friends and family who are dealing with this, who are struggling with, hey, is my company doing what they can, doing the best they can to protect us as employees. And I think that employees are trying to do what's right. And I think it just in the chaos, I think some of them are trying to shotgun it, and they're just taking things piecemeal and doing what they can. But to Martin's point, is like if you have a culture that's built on trust, where people communicate, collaborate, plan, and execute better all around, then having to shift your business to work remotely, that transition, while painful, uh, you're going to be able to make that transition better and faster than your competitors. I think companies were trying to figure it out. I think when this all hit, they were like, okay, so I guess we're doing this, working remotely. And then as that reality set in, I was like, okay, now how do we do this? Uh, and then now it's like reality setting in, and they're just you can see a constant refinement. You see it in Lowe's, you see it in Home Depot, Walmart, where they're each day they're doing more and more to protect their employees, but also to help the public protect themselves sometimes.
So, with our last 5 minutes, let's shift now to the future. Uh, to your point, Michael, companies are sort of adapting in real time, taking care of people, figuring out every day what they can do a little bit more. That's awesome to hear. All right, fast forward 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. No one really knows how this is going to be playing out, but let's assume at some point we're kind of moving past the worst of it, and we're getting used to what my colleague Britton Skinner likes to say, the new normal. And what does that look like? And I'd love to hear from everyone here, and I'll maybe start with Brad. We haven't got to you in a minute. What are you kind of anticipating next fall looking like for people?
So I would end. One of the things I was thinking about, Charlie, as you were talking about just moving to remote work, is there's so much that's changed beyond just remote work. There's so much about my daily life and the routines and the rituals that I'm involved with. There are parenting new styles that are developing. There's the relationship stuff between people who are married, living together, partners, spouses. This isn't just about like I'm just working online now, but it is a complete shift in the way in which life is being done. And I think my expectation for the way that the fall is going to roll out is I think we're going to get really clear on the things that are important, not only from an organizational perspective, but from like a human perspective. And the other thing is I think we're going to be more connected to our communities, our localized geographical communities. And I think that's going to be a really good thing. It's going to inform the way that we do our work. And I think people will live better lives through their work, not just by their work, if that makes sense.
All right, how about you, Martin?
I think the future is going to be set, and I think about this from a company culture standpoint, and we've talked about this a few times, but I think the future is going to be set based on your activities right now and how you make those decisions. What do you do when someone says, "Hey, I don't feel safe coming to work"? Like, how do you address that? And this gets back to that trust component that we've talked about a lot, and a basic piece of employee engagement, which is my manager cares about me. I mean, that's a very valid, very often used statement. One of the best ways that you care about people is you're putting them in a position to be safe. Like, that's a basic fundamental Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like one of the foundational bits, right? So how you're addressing those things now is going to play out very dramatically in your relationship with your employees in the future, because they're not going to forget about that. And so I think for the people that have stepped up and done a lot and taken this time and communicated and worked with their employees through these things, I think they're going to have a stronger and tighter relationship there. I think for the companies that haven't done it, that have said, "Hey, our employees are the most important thing, but we got to keep running the business," and kind of on the side of that, they've swept under the rug the fact that their employees don't feel safe. I think that comes back to bite them, not just from a public standpoint, but privately inside the business in terms of the way that they end up working with their employees long term. And the next time that this blows up again, that flares up inside the organization, because I think that there's a strong probability that as we go into the fall, that we're going to see, more of these cases. Like, I think hopefully we get through an initial shutdown period, but there may be more. And I think when that happens, you're going to get dividends back on the trust you built, or you're going to get hammered again on the places where you broke that trust. So
That's great. Michael, I'm going to give you the final word today as our guest.
Yeah, well, I mean, Martin hit on a lot of the points. In times of crisis, I like a quote by Henry Ford. It says, one of the greatest discoveries a man makes one of his great surprises is to find he can do what he was afraid he couldn't do. And to Martin's point, I think, how companies build trust, they demonstrate care and concern, how they develop, that I think last week you guys talked about confident compassion, right? How you lead with compassion. I mean, people are scared right now. And I think that, the things that we can do to help drive out that fear through building trust and focusing on relationships, challenging our leaders to over communicate and sometimes, and also be transparent about what the organization is doing and how they're addressing these problems. Uh, you know, this is what I think. I think at the end of the day, the companies who really focus on building relationships, focusing on their people, are the ones that in 6 months from now are going to be much better positioned to when the dust settles and the economy starts to rebound.
Well, thank you everyone again for the time. This was a great, rich conversation. Michael Fackler of Caliber Safety, I'm pointing the wrong way. Brad Shuck over here, University of Louisville. Martin Lowe, OnPlane Consulting. It's starting to feel like the Brady Bunch now with 4 people. But this was awesome. Another awesome, rich conversation. So thank you all for joining this morning. And we'll all be in touch here as we continue this conversation. Michael, hope to have you back here. This was great. Thank you.
Thanks, Charley. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Have a great week and stay healthy and safe.